Hello and good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. So my name is Amy Hammond and I work in the marketing team at Bytes, and I'm pleased to be joined by James Reeder, who is the technical director at Distology, who will be going through the webinar today. That is all around streamlining your joiner, mover, leaver processes with Okta. And we also have Toby here from Bytes, who's going to briefly discuss the relationship between Bytes and Okta. But before I pass over to Toby, I'm just going to really quickly go through some housekeeping details with you. Throughout the webinar, you are muted, but we'll hold a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you do have any questions, just pop them in the questions box and we will answer those for you at the end. We're also recording the webinar today, so I'll send you all a link to the recording most probably tomorrow morning. And there is a few questions at the end of the webinar, so if you'd like any further information or if you'd like to request a callback, just pop that in there and we will get back to you. Okay, so I'm now going to pass you over to Toby.
Thanks, Amy. So good morning, everyone. I just wanted to highlight a few reasons behind the subject matter for today's webinar. So Bytes partnered with Okta beginning of last year now, and two of the conversations that come up quite regularly is with regards to any customers that are currently going through mergers and acquisitions or simply have a complex Active Directory environment. So those headaches around AD forests and utilizing different domains around the organization. Okta has a key play that James is going to go into in a bit more detail for you shortly. But also as the title would suggest of the webinar, the movers, joiners and leavers process, and how Okta can help streamline the license acquisition process and the onboarding and offboarding process of your employees, and taking that headache away from you and your IT team. So without further ado, I'll pass over to James to get us started.
Thanks, Amy and Toby. Let me just throw up my screen here. Wonderful. So as Toby's mentioned, today's core focus is on demonstrating Okta's lifecycle management capabilities and how we can streamline that joiners, movers and leavers process. So to expand the sort of agenda in a little bit more detail, we've done our intros. I'm going to then start off with a little bit of an Okta 101 to give some context of the wider aspects of the Okta platform. I'll then be sort of delving into how we deal with the joiners, movers, leavers process inside Okta. So carrying out that powerful automation functionality to streamline your processes. The actual bulk of the session today will be a hands-on demonstration and actually show you how simple it is to integrate these various different technologies and systems into the Okta platform. And last but not least, a Q&A. So moving on to the actual Okta 101. So Okta is the foundation for secure connections between people and technology. And what this really means is Okta is a business enabler. It's a way to empower organizations to connect people to technology. And most importantly, doing that in a simple fashion and also securely. So Okta has a number of properties that make it unique. So first and foremost, Okta was born and built in the cloud. From the day that Okta was founded and from the first line of code that was written, Okta was built as a cloud-based service. You can't take an on-premise piece of identity management software and put it in the cloud and get what Okta's built. Secondly, Okta, again, it's all about empowering businesses. We're all about connecting to anything because technology is changing faster than ever before. What your users need today is different to what they'll need tomorrow, and also perhaps different to what they actually used yesterday. And the only way that you have, the only way for you to be successful when you're connecting to these technologies, and especially around your joiners, movers and leavers process, is being able to connect to anything. And because Okta is neutral, independent and unbiased, we can give you that flexibility to connect to the technology that you're using today, but also tomorrow. In addition, if you're going to do what Okta does, managing millions of identities across the world, you need to be 100% secure, and so are we. So what we do is not only do our products make customers more secure, we also heavily invest inside our service and our infrastructure for it to be secure as well. So Okta is SOC 2 type compliant, ISO 27001, 2018, and we have a wide variety of certifications to give you confidence that you can trust your identities into the Okta platform. And last but not least, and especially because we're a cloud platform, Okta needs to be always on, with a front door for everyone's access into all their tools they're using to carry out their work. And in addition to that, if we're automating your processes, we can't afford for us to be downtime and affect that onboarding or offboarding process. So the Okta platform is designed to be always on, up 100% of the time, even during maintenance and upgrade windows. So we give you that best-in-class availability and hence experience. Now, the Okta platform consists of 5 key modules: Universal Directory, Single Sign-On, Adaptive Multi-Factor Authentication, Lifecycle Management, which will be the key topic of today, and API Access Management. Now, to give some context of the wider areas of the platform, I'm going to delve a little bit into these modules really quickly, just to give you that context. But before that, from a commercial perspective, Okta has a really simple licensing model. And we have one platform, but it comes in 2 different formats. We have on the left-hand side of the screen what you can see are IT products. That's where you use Okta to deliver a service to your internal user base. But potentially, Okta in its own right can be used as a service to provide that identity layer back out to your own customers. So we can also commercially position ourselves at API layer to give you that capability too. But as I say, today's core focus will be on lifecycle management and how we deliver that to your own internal user base. But to start off with the modules, we have a Universal Directory module down here at the bottom. Now, the Universal Directory module inside Okta is essentially our cloud-based directory system. So this is where you can store your user identities, unlimited customizable attributes on those user identities, and also group memberships, both static and dynamic groups. Now, Universal Directory can be used as a standalone directory service. So if you're connecting to exclusively cloud-based platforms, you can use it as the only or single authentication source into those platforms. And it also can be interfaced by LDAPs if you wanted to do so. However, where Okta really comes into its own with Universal Directory, and sort of why we gave it the term universal, it's all about connecting to your entire IT ecosystem or infrastructure and giving you that single golden identity across all those different systems. And that's what links into a lifecycle management module up at the top. So what this means is Universal Directory is the hub to connect everything and anything together. And lifecycle management is the particular module that gives you that automation capabilities. So, for instance, we connect to Active Directory, LDAP systems, HR systems, Office 365, and other business applications. So what we normally do with Universal Directory is you define something as a source directory, and that could be multiple directory systems if you wanted to do so across different users. Usually this would be Active Directory or HR system. I will integrate with that platform and use that to provision users into Universal Directory. From there, based upon a simple UI or programmatic by the API-driven rule engine, you can automate the provisioning, updating, and deprovisioning of users into connected applications through our lifecycle management module. And lifecycle management is much more than just user management. It can go further. It can use license management, role management, security and permissions as well, and all that good stuff to give you rich integrations into your key business systems to simplify those onboarding and offboarding processes. In terms of what Okta integrates with, we have what we call our Okta integration network, or our pre-made catalog per se. And this currently has over 6,100 integrations out of the box across the wide variety of integration points we have, from single sign-on, MFA, and lifecycle management. And if it's inside our catalog, it's a case of following the on-screen instructions to carry out the integration process. However, if it's not in our catalog, we have toolkits and agents to allow you to rapidly integrate anything that's not supported natively from out of the box. And like I say, lifecycle management will go into more depth on the next slide and walk through actually how that works inside a product demonstration. Moving on quickly to the other modules, just to give you some context. In addition to actually the provisioning of user accounts, we also do single sign-on. So for single sign-on, we support the the common federation standards. So SAML, OpenID Connect, WS Federation, OAuth 2.0, and we also have our own technology called Secure Web Authentication, essentially credential storage, whether that be static or dynamic credentials, and replaying them into web forms. And we deliver that experience through web portals, mobile apps. You can even make your own custom portals. In addition, we also support it for desktop applications that support federated sign-on. So say Office 365 on the desktop, etc. Moving on to our adaptive MFA module. Essentially, this is a list of factors to authenticate your users to the Okta service or anything that you want to connect with multi-factor authentication through API or Radius integration. The more interesting aspect of this module is where the term adaptive comes from. And what that means is rather than having a simple on or off rule set to control when factors are required, we can use conditional access rules to control when access is allowed, access is denied, or factors are required as part of a sequence to authenticate users to a system. So based on who a user is, what groups they belong to, what application they're trying to access, the IP or geographical context, their device context, so is it a trusted corporation issued device, what the user agent information on that device is, and using all that context to give those decisions in terms of those rich access controls. And rather than just hard and fast rules as well, we can even use past behavior insights into individual users to actually determine their output as well. So for instance, if a user is traveling faster than 550 miles per hour, we can actually block the connection altogether or require them to go through additional sequences to authenticate to your systems. And why this module is great is one of the biggest advantages, especially when we look at cloud-based platforms, is that your users have universal access. They have the flexibility to work anywhere remotely. However, because your users have it, so does everybody else. So having these rich access controls can really tighten how people access your applications and give you those additional security layers. Moving on past lifecycle management to API access management. API access management, without going into too much depth here, is essentially Okta's implementation of the OAuth 2.0 standard. Now, moving into today's actual topic, it's all about how Okta can help streamline the lifecycle management process within the organization. So with the number of digital systems utilized by companies growing exponentially day by day, as well as the move away from traditional, flat on-premise models to cloud-based systems, being able to manage the joiners, movers, and leavers process with any organization can be troublesome, but also costly from an administration perspective. Using Okta's lifecycle management capabilities, we can both seamlessly and rapidly integrate to any digital system that has a way for us to talk to it and automate that JML process. From a single source location, or as mentioned before, from multiple locations for different subsets of users, we can have users created, modified, and removed, all powered by a simple rule engine. And as I said again before, it's much more than basic account management. We can drive licensing, roles, and even security controls as well. And as you guys expect, automation, quite simply brings in, really easy to quantify time savings and hence help to reduce, administration costs within the business. But also it helps from a security perspective as well, because it helps you to enforce a best practice model or minimum level of access for your users across all digital systems. And for those organizations that go through, merger and acquisition phases, Okta can also remove the headache of merging or migrating digital systems by facilitating rapid or slow but seamless integration throughout that process. So what is today's demonstration going to cover? So today's demonstration, we're going to show you how we can rapidly integrate with Active Directory to provision users into Okta, to drive a provisioning process, then further downstream into connected applications. We're going to look at how you can actually use a HR system to populate Okta and then downstream platforms such as Active Directory. And then we're going to look at things around AD to AD consolidation as well, and how quickly we can actually migrate users from one system to another. So I'm going to end the slideshow here and jump into the first part of the demo. So over here, I have my Okta admin portal. So this is a single admin console to manage the entire Okta experience. So to start off, what I want to do is if I go to my directory and people, I can see a handful of users inside this platform. So what I want to do to start off with is I want to bring in some users from a single Active Directory to start off with. So I'm going to go to Active Directory. I'm going to add a directory service. And to start off with, I'm going to add Active Directory. So how we integrate with Active Directory is through a small, lightweight agent. So the agent is about 4 meg in size. It's very small in terms of sort of process, resource required to actually carry out its task. And also, there's minimum changes required from an infrastructure perspective. All Okta agents, including the AD agent, talk exclusively on port 443 outbound, and you can whitelist that to Okta's IP range if you wish to do so as well. Which means there's no complex inbound firewall changes required to be made. And how that mechanism works, we essentially talk out on a outbound long HTTPS call and have a sort of a permanent session established to Okta to be able to send or receive commands. So following from the setup wizard here, it's going to ask me to download the agent. So I'm just going to click download and move over to here. Now, if I go over to my domain controller, now, the actual agent can be installed on any member server. It doesn't have to be a domain controller, but for today's exercise, I'm actually going to put it on the domain controller directly. Oh, let me just put my password in here. And so here, I've got an Active Directory. And inside here, there's an OU structure with some user OUs and some group OUs. Now, to start off with, I'm going to install the agent. Now, rather than copying the one that I've just downloaded, into the Blue Peter fashion, I've got my pre-downloaded installer here. And I'm just going to run for this process now. So we're just going to next a few times. I'm going to leave it in the default installation path. It's enumerated my domain, which is okta-demo.ga. I'm going to click next. It's then going to ask me, do I want to specify an AD service account to talk to your AD, or do you want it to create an account for you? I'm going to ask it to create an account. However, that account already exists inside my Active Directory structure, so it's going to ask me to specify the password for that existing account that it's trying to create. So I'm going to click next. It's given the option if I want to talk out to a sort of Okta through a proxy server, which I don't, so I'm just going to skip next here. And it's going to ask me for what my Okta org name is. So my Okta org name is okta-demo-domain UK. I'm now going to click next. So the last point of this installation process is using an Okta service account to then be able to talk back out to Okta. So if I go back to directory and open up a new tab in people, I've got this account inside Okta I've already created called AD service. So now coming back to my DC and logging in as this account. Oh, let me just make sure I've got my password correct. Oh, someone lost the password. Okay, let me just double check my password here. What I'm just going to do is quickly change it to a temporary password. And because this account is administrator and it's not logged in before, it's just going to ask me to configure MFA. So I'm just going to click on the Apple logo here because I have an iPhone and just set up Okta Verify soft token application on my phone. It's just going to ask me to scan this QR code. Once I've scanned that QR code, I've now got that factor set up for use next time. So I can just click finish here. And then it's just going to ask me to set a new password, which I will do now. Now, this is just because my password wasn't working, so I've made this a little bit easier. So now if I go through this process again, now, what actually happens is once you've actually provided this Okta service account details, the password is actually relevant from the next screen onwards, because what Okta will do, it will generate an API token inside this agent to then communicate with Okta from that stage onwards. So just wait for this installation to finish. And that is now done. I've now installed the agent inside the server. Now the actual configuration is all done on the Okta side. So I come back to directory and directory integrations, I've got this domain, it's inside Okta, and it's not yet configured. So if I go through here, I just need to configure a few options. So here it's going to ask me what OUs do I want to bring users from. I'm going to select my users OU. We can even have a feature enabled to have an additional LDAP filter to filter on top of the OU selection if you wish to do so. But for now, I'm just going to do it exclusively on OU. I also, for the groups OU filter, I'm going to select my groups OU, and the username format for my users will be their ADEPM. And you can change the format that people log into the Okta system. So I'm going to click next here. It's then going to ask me what attributes do I want to sync. So we can sync any attributes inside the AD profile that you have in your domain. I'm just going to leave it with the base attributes that come by default, but again, you can change this at any time moving forward. So I've clicked next. My domain is now integrated with Okta. And I can see here, I've got one agent on PDC, which is my primary domain controller, that's active and healthy. So this is taking me to the settings tab, where I can change those settings I've just configured around OU selection, and also the Okta username format. Now, a couple of different options here is at the moment in time, we actually haven't configured how we're importing users to Active Directory, from Active Directory, sorry. And it's a couple of different ways, depending whether you want a one-off process or a scheduled import from AD or a real-time synchronization process. So perhaps during the merger and acquisition phase, where you want a one-off process, we can go to our import tab and do a full or incremental import from that source directory to bring them into Okta, then further down the line, push them into another system. However, if you're using it as a standard integration point, you probably want a real-time or scheduled integration with AD from import process. So if I come down here to settings, I've got a couple of different options. So first, I've got something called JIT provisioning. So JIT provisioning, or just-in-time provisioning, is essentially Okta's way of generating real-time synchronization without the bandwidth overhead. Essentially, when users log on to the system, if they exist in Okta, they'll be authenticated successfully. If they don't, in real time, we'll actually check if the user exists in AD. If they do, bring them back into Okta and allow them to log into the system in real time. Also, various other actions inside the system, such as the user logging on again, viewing their profile, etc., will cause an update or a deactivation, if required, based upon the changes that are made inside AD. So I'm just going to enable JIT here. I'm also going to enable, on top of the JIT real-time provisioning process, a scheduled import every hour. And also down here, I've got a couple of other options. So I want to not send users activation emails for this domain. I don't want them to be spammed with emails at the moment in time. And I also want to allow the importation of universal security groups. A few more things left to do. So we have what we call our match settings. So when users are imported from Okta, they can come in three different forms. They could be a new user never seen by Okta before. They could be a partial match, so they sort of match a user that's in some shape or form that already exists inside Okta based on certain attributes. Or they could be an exact match. So certain attributes are exactly matched to existing Okta users, which potentially means they are the same user account. So here we're just defining what is a match. So for me, I want to define an exact match is the Okta username, which is the ADEPN, the email address and name matches. For a partial match, I'll just leave it as first and last name for now. And then what do you want to do with it? So for matched users that are exact, I want to auto confirm them, so auto connect those two identities together. For partial matches, I will leave it unticked for now because I want to manually intervene there. And for new users, I want to auto confirm and auto activate them, which means they immediately get brought into AD. Down below, a lot of these features we won't need to later on in the demo, but this is where we have the ability to tick a few boxes and enable right back to AD. So maybe you want to create users back in AD or update them or deactivate them. We actually just come into a box here and tick the functionality to have them created inside AD. The only one we want at the moment is what we call profile master. So with this setting enabled, it means that this Active Directory is a possible source of truth for my users. And it's giving me a couple of options saying, if they're deactivated inside AD, I want to do what? Do I want to suspend them or deactivate them inside Okta? I'm going to click deactivate. And if they're reactivated in AD, I want to reactivate them inside Okta as well. So if I click save settings now, I've now got it configured. So by going into import, rather than waiting for my scheduled or just-in-time import, I'm just going to run a full import process to import all users from my domain into Okta. So I'll just wait for this process to carry out. It should only take about 30 seconds to a minute. And what this is doing is connecting to the AD agent and forcing that synchronization process to happen. So after we've done the actual import process here, I'm going to show you how we can actually turn this on its head and using Okta and a HR system, actually provision back down to Active Directory to show how you can have a role reverse, and rather than having separate HR and IT onboarding strategies, have HR-driven provisioning for the entire organization. So now this scan is finished and my users have been imported. So I can see 15 users have been confirmed. So if I go to directory and people, I can see I've got all my users have come into here. So we look at an example user, Hugo. I can see he's coming from an Active Directory source. I can see what groups he belongs to. So I can see he belongs to this group inside AD and also this one, finance and operations. So we can actually bring all your group structure into Okta as well. Looking at profile, I can see his attributes that are coming from AD. So his username, title, all that kind of good stuff as well. And also some other specific AD attributes like his object GUID, SAM account name, DN path, and so forth. And that is the import process inside Okta. So in 10 minutes, we have that rapid capability to import users from Okta. Now what we can do is we can do other stuff with this to push it downstream. But to start off with, like I said, I'm going to actually provision back down to Active Directory first. So our directory integrations are carried out in this directory integration location. For any other source, we go to applications. And currently I've got no applications configured inside Okta. So what I want to do, I want to add application. And this takes us to our catalog of those pre-made integrations. Now, if something's not in our catalog, I can use our create new app wizard to rapidly make an integration. However, my particular HR system exists inside the catalog. So by searching for Bamboo HR, I can see my HR platform does indeed exist here, and it supports federated sign-on via SAML and provisioning. So by clicking add, it's then going to ask me for some information. So firstly, it's going to ask me what is my subdomain in Bamboo HR. So over here on the screen, I can see my subdomain is Okta Demo UK. By pasting this in, I can click next. Now, because I'm not going to use sign-on back into Bamboo HR at this moment in time, I can just skip past this stage because I'm just currently using it exclusively to provision it into Okta. So I'm just going to click save and quickly bypass this sign-on screen. And because I'm making it exclusively for provisioning only at this moment in time, if I go to general, I'm just going to click two buttons that mean that users won't see this application because they won't be able to sign on to it anyway. Now, if we go to the provisioning tab, this is how easy it is to create provisioning integration. So I'm going to click configure API integration, and then it's going to ask me to authenticate with Bamboo HR. So to start off with, I'm just going to log back into my Bamboo system and then click on authenticate with Bamboo HR. What this will do, it will connect to your instance of Bamboo HR and actually grab an authentication token. So just like that, I've got an integration token. Now, in addition, it's given me one option here called a pre-start interval. So when you're integrating with HR systems, we have, depending on what information they allow us to see, we can do some different things with them. So one thing Bamboo HR allows us to do is see users via the API that we're connecting to Bamboo HR with in advance of them starting at the company. So what that means is before they actually hit their start date, we can actually create and provision them in advance, ready to go from day zero live for that user. So what I can do, I could change this to a 5-day pre-start interval. So 5 days before they're destined to start, they'll be provisioned and then go for the Okta engine. So I'm going to click save here. So now when I've got this provisioning tab, I can go back to API integration to change that, but I also have two options: provisioning to the application, which I'm not going to be doing at this stage, or provisioning to Okta. So this is actually importing from the Bamboo HR system. So going through here, I can go for a couple of different options. So I can see here, do we want to schedule an import from that system? It's a little bit like AD. We can manually import them or have a set schedule. I'm not going to do a schedule at the moment in time. I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'm moving down again, just like AD, we have the ability to, what are we going to do with these users when they come into the system in terms of the matching process? But I'm not going to do anything at this stage. I'm just going to leave this as it is. So what I'm going to do, I'm now going to go into Bamboo HR and create a new employee. So let's add employee. This employee can be 007. Oh, too many zeros there. I'm just going to put in some user details here. Let's see, put a date in. Let's put in some arbitrary details in here. I'm also going to put in some particular bits of information. So what I want for their work email, I'm just going to put in his work email is stanley.staff@okta.demo.ga. And then I can put his personal email if I wanted to do so at gmail.com. Go through here, and I'm going to hire him today. So on the 23rd of January, and he is a full-time employee. I'm just going to put some random stuff in here just to fill in the details. So he's sales, Europe, London. So I click save. This account is now created inside our HR system, and I can see Stanley Staff is active today. So now, if I go into Okta, rather than doing a scheduled import, again, I'm just going to trigger a full import from the system. So by clicking import now, I'm just going to try and bring that process in. So while that process happens, this data is just bringing these users into Okta. The next stage will actually be showing how easily we provision them back down to Active Directory. So we'll just wait for this to finish. And in fact, just in case it takes a little bit of a second, in case of internet issues, I'm just going to open up a new tab called Groups. Now inside Okta, we have the concept of groups, and groups can come from different sources. They can come from Okta or from AD, HR system, any other application. And groups are really how we do everything inside Okta. Our directory structure is flat. We don't have any concept of OUs. We use groups to manage everything. And essentially groups have a consequence, or perhaps more than one consequence, that does something, such as chooses how they can log on through single sign-on, or how their account gets provisioned into different systems. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new group. And this is the group I'm going to use to provision back into Active Directory. So I'm going to call this AD Okta, let's say Okta demo.ga. I'm going to call this AD push, in fact, and then finance OU. And then essentially this group will push the users into the finance OU for Okta demo.ga. So I'm going to click add group. So while that has happened, I've actually got my users imported into Okta. Now, because inside the provisioning tab before, back over here, I've not chosen what to do with new users, whether to bring them automatically. I've just left that unticked, which means rather than be automatically imported, they come into this sort of holding sort of pen area here. So what I'm going to do, just to show you this concept, I'm going to import a single user manually rather than import everyone at this stage. So here I can see Stanley Staff. I could match him to an existing user, but I just want to bring him in as a new user. So I click confirm. If I now go to directory and people, I've got Stanley Knife has just come through and he's active. Now, one thing that actually is, I've got this other user called Stanley Knife. So what I'm just going to do, I'm just going to delete this user here because he shouldn't actually be in here. So I'm just going to press delete and go through that process. So I go back to the Stanley we just brought in. He's coming in a stage position, so he's not currently active. I'm just going to activate him manually, but you could again trigger this activation process automatically. Now, currently, if I go to his profile, he's coming from Bamboo HR, so I can see he came from here. And I can see his attributes, so I can see his job title and all that kind of good stuff here as well. It's all come from the HR system, but he's not been provisioned anywhere yet. So if I go to groups, I've got this AD group that I just created. I now want to populate it automatically. So if I come down here, what I want to do is I can see Stanley is part of the account executive team. So what that means is I'm just going to use this as the information that triggers them being provisioned into the finance OU. So if I go to rules, and rules is essentially our automation engine to provision users into systems. I'm going to create a really basic rule. So I'm going to say assign to finance OU group for Okta demo.ga. I'm going to do a really basic rule. So I could say if user attribute title, and if I go back to Stanley's account and I go to account executive equals account executive, I'm then going to assign to that AD push group. And I can test this by actually searching for Stanley and seeing, yep, he matches the rule. Now, this is a really basic rule, but actually, if you want to go more advanced, we have our expression language. So using our Okta expression language, you can make really complex, nested or conditional statements to choose how people go into a group or multiple groups, which then have consequences across the system. So I'm just going to click save here and have that basic rule saying if the title equals this, they go to that particular OU. Now, currently, if I make this rule active, but I've still not actually configured this to integrate with AD. So firstly, what I'm going to do is just go back to AD, and I realized, as you probably saw a second ago, that I actually had Stanley from a previous time still existence. So what I'm actually just going to do is I'm just going to find where he has gone and actually just delete Stanley from inside the environment. So let's filter. Oh, so he seems to have actually been deleted here anyway. So that's all okay. So now I'm going to enable push back to AD. So if I go to directory integrations, and we actually saw before back in settings, the ability to have create, update, and deactivate into AD. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to enable these features by ticking the boxes. And what it's also given the option to do is when a user is created, if they've not already preset their credentials through a separate process inside Okta, you can actually get Okta to generate a one-time password for their AD account and send that to a nominated function. So here, I'm just going to have that sent to my email, and I'm going to click save. So this is enabling the ability to provision back to AD. If I now go back to directory and groups, I now need to link that group to the provisioning capability. So by clicking on this group, I can go to manage directories, and this concept works with applications as well. So if I go to manage directories, I can see I've got one domain here. Potentially, you could actually use this to push to multiple domains at one go. But for me, I'm going to select this single domain. I'm going to click next. And here I can say, what OU do I want them to go to? So I want them to go to the finance and operations OU. I could even give them some generic type information like preferred language based upon this group structure back down to AD or division information. But for me, I'll just select the OU and I'll click confirm changes. So now, when someone goes into that group, they get pushed down to AD. So I now go to people, and I'm going to search for Stanley. So here, I can see he's actually been pushed back down to Active Directory. So if I look in Finance and Operations, and I just refresh this, I can see Stanley staff has come to Active Directory, as simple as that. And if more people went into that group now, they'll just automatically get pushed through. So that's provision users back into Active Directory in a simple GUI-driven rule engine. Now, to add one step further to this, if I go to directory integrations and Active Directory, I've also got this concept of push groups. And this is really powerful when you actually want to use rich HR information to drive security or distribution groups back into AD, or perhaps another system like Office 365, or even during AD to AD consolidation migration. So with this push groups feature, I can search for a group. So if I go back to group, I want to create another one and make a security group. So I'm going to create this group called AD SG for security group. account execs. So I'm going to click add group. Now, because I'm a little bit lazy here, I'm going to go back to the rules, make this one inactive for a second while I edit it. And so I can see here, that is exactly the same rule I want to populate this account executive group. So if I just go back to activate and make a new rule and call this populate account execs group. And for the same process, if their title is this, they get pushed into this group. And I can just preview it again with Stanley. Click save and activate it. So if I look into this group now, I can see Stanley's in it. So if I now go back to this push groups and I search for that AD group, I can then choose where this group goes to. So I want to push it into my groups OU. I could then link it to an existing group if I did, or actually get Okta to create it and continually manage it. So this group, for me, I want it to be a global group and a security group. I click save, and as simple as that, if I go into my group section here, I can see this group is now pushed into Okta, and I can see my members. And to show you how quick this actually is, if I go to this group now, and I want to add another person to that group, so say Hugo, add to this group manually. If I now go back to this group, Hugo is in that, as simple as that. So really powerful automation capabilities, for any connected platform. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you is actually provisioning to an application and how quick that is as well. So I'm just going to close a couple of tabs here. So if I now go to applications, maybe I want to push to a downstream application like Office 365. So we go to the add application catalog, search for Office 365, click add, and again, get the required information. So here it's going to ask for my tenant name. So my tenant name here is Okta demo domain. I'm just going to copy this here, make sure no spelling mistakes. It's then going to ask for what domain do I want to federate. So here, I want to federate with the Okta demo domain. Let me just close the Bamboo HR tab as well. But now, oh, that's not copied right. If I just make sure I copy this domain name. So I provision users based upon this domain name. So I'm going to click save. I'm just going to skip past this stage for sign-on again because I just want to provision users exclusively at this stage. I can then go to the provisioning tab. And just like before, we configure API integration. And it's going to ask for some credentials. So I'm just going to quickly grab some credentials for here. So I go to my password vault. Oh, let's have a look here. I'm just going to copy my admin credentials. And test them. So this is just going to create the API link to Office 365. I can click save. Now, just like before, I can choose to provision to or from the app. In this case, I'm just going to choose to the app. Now, for Office 365, we have various different ways of provisioning. We can provision in conjunction with AAD Connect or actually completely replace it. So the choice is there. And again, if anyone has any questions, we can arrange a call to go in more details at this afterwards. But for me, I just want to use basic profile sync at the moment in time. And I want to enable create, update, deactivate for now. So this will enable that CRUD capability into Office 365. So if I now go to Stanley's profile, one thing that will come through is if I look at my Office 365 domain, the actual domain name is Okta demodomain.ga. However, his email address is actually oktademo.ga. So we have a little bit of a conflict here. So what we can actually do is we have a really powerful capability called Profile Editor. And what Profile Editor allows you to do is configure mappings and transformations between data sets. Because inside Okta, if you click on Profile, you have a list of attributes that belong to a user or potentially belong to a user. And you can even create your own attributes in here and define them with pre-enumerated lists and all that kind of good stuff. However, if I go back to profiles, we also have a list of attributes inside Office 365 that we're mapping to. So here, I can see the information inside Office 365 that I'm currently exposing. If I used our full universal sync rather than profile sync, we can map to any attribute inside Office 365. But because I'm using this particular type, we have a reduced set because I want to use it in conjunction with AD Connect, essentially. But if we go to map attributes, what this allows us to do is at the top is map data from Office 365 to Okta. Perhaps if you're mapping from a domain to Okta or the HR system to Okta, you can do it that way. Or we can map back into Office 365. So here we can see all the abilities and what data is being mapped to one field. So here we can use our expression language again, a little bit like the rules section, to use conditional and nested statements to map the data between the two systems. Now, for Office 365, for the username, you can see here, the username is not actually mapped here. The username, unlike the rest of the attributes, is actually mapped over here inside this application username format. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come down here and click custom and make my mapping here. So what I want to do is, rather than using the existing email address that's coming from HR system, apply a transformation to it. So if we go to our Okta expression language, just to show you here, we have a full guide on everything that we can do in terms of functionality. So if we go to string functions, we see all the different things that we can do. Now, one of the things that will be really useful here is converting the bit after the @ symbol. So what I want to do, I'm going to copy this function called string before. So this will give me everything before the @ symbol or the character or set of characters I've chosen. So by actually copying this function and going back into my tab here, I'm going to use this, and rather the bit before this string here, I'm going to say user.email. So this is the email attribute of the Okta profile. So what this would do is give me everything before the @ symbol. So if I preview Stanley now here, I can see this comes with stanley.staff. However, I actually want to add now the suffix. If I now go add a string, I go to my domain and see here, Okta demo domain.ga. So by copying this, or it's between the double quotes, and I'll re-preview it, I can see this is the expected preview result of when the transformation happens. So by clicking save. So if I go to Office 365 and go to users, I can see here that Stanley staff already exists in. So to show you this being created from scratch, I'm just going to delete this previous Stanley staff user here. So just delete this user and confirm. So what we can now do is I'm going to go back to my groups, and I've got this finance OU group here. So I've got an existing group that Stanley belongs to. So I'm going to use this to push to Office 365. So if I go to Office 365 and assignments, assign groups, I'll just use this AD push group. By clicking assign, I can now choose what licenses this user can get. So I'm just going to choose the full Business Essential pack. So anyone in this group gets Business Essentials. And inside Okta, we have the ability to aggregate licenses based, if they belong to multiple groups assigned to Office 365, we can aggregate, or we can use in a hierarchical priority-based order to determine which set they should get. So here, I just say Business Essentials. So by clicking save, there's a little bit of a user here. So I just click on this user, it's come up with an error. So what this means is there's some issue with their user principal name. So I just click on the pencil here. Well, that's why. So if you see here before, I made a little bit of a typo. I forgot to put the @ symbol back in. So now, if I go to applications and just make a little fix of that typo, and then put the @ symbol. If I now go back to our task section, I can actually just retry that task and retry and push that user in. So that's just waiting for that to update quickly. So to make that come through a little bit quicker, I'm just going to remove that assignment and remake it to Office 365. So if I just remove that group re-add it in, just to push through. So now with people, Stanley staff should go through. Now what we could also do, we could even push groups to Office 365 too. So maybe you want to push security groups or distribution groups. Again, just like we did for AD, you can do that for Okta. So now, if I go back to Stanley, I should now see him inside Office 365. Yep, so here, Stanley Stife is locked in. We've not currently enabled single sign-on, but Stanley has been generated inside the environment successfully. Now that is a quick look at the provisioning capabilities. Now the one thing, because we are running out of time and I want to save some time for questions, is we've not shown AD to AD provisioning. Now the AD to AD provisioning is very simple. We just use the concepts we've worked so far. The only difference is we'd use directory integrations and we'd add another domain, import from one and provision back into another, just like we showed the import from the domain originally and the provision back into it from a different source. So the concept is the same, all simple to do through our user wizard. So yeah, because of questions, I'm just gonna stop there. So yeah, we've now got some time for questions. So please feel free to answer any questions. So we've got a couple, oh, sorry, Amy.
Oh, no problem. I was just going to say thank you. And yeah, so if you do have any questions, just pop them in the questions box, which is just the right-hand side of your screen. I think some have come through already. James, can you see them?
Yep, absolutely. So a couple of questions so far is working out whether my applications or platforms integrate with Okta. So this is a really good question. So what we have is a catalog online. So if I go to Okta integrations, what this will actually come to is a little find your apps page, and we can post this as a link afterwards. This is a link where you can see all the pre-made integrations with Okta on a publicly accessible website to see what we support out the box. However, if it doesn't get support out the box, there's no need to worry. We can still rapidly integrate it as long as we have some way to talk to the application. So if it has an API we can talk to, if it has a database we can talk to, or perhaps something more rudimentary such as the scheduling of CSV exports and imports to carry out that process. So like I say, as long as there's some way to talk to an application, no matter how primitive it may be, we can carry out this automation process. Another couple of questions here. So it's about if Okta gives licenses, can it take away and return licenses to the pool? Absolutely. Okta can remove those licenses, bring them back into the pool for reuse across other users. And we can even enable a feature so you have a 30-day grace window for the licenses before they're taken away from the user to allow their mailbox to be utilized during the transition period. Again, another one about Office 365. So Okta can work in conjunction with Azure AD Sync or replace it. The option is there. So normally what we suggest is Okta, unlike Azure AD Sync, is completely real time. There's no scheduled process to wait, and it's also much simpler and quicker to set up, and has the only thing required is an AD agent to sync through. However, the only time we would really suggest that Okta may not be as preferable as Azure AD Connect is if you're using an Exchange hybrid environment. And that's because Azure AD Connect has one thing that it does very specifically in hybrid environments to pass certain data back to AD, Okta can't do because Microsoft doesn't expose that functionality. So most of the time we will replace Azure AD Connect, but in very specific scenarios around hybrid environments, you may need to use Azure AD Connect in combination or instead of the Okta provisioning piece. So that's all the questions so far. So I know we've got a few more minutes. So if anyone does have any more questions, we've got a little bit more time left.
Got a couple more here for you, James, actually. So one saying, we create users for staff at our subsidiary companies to access our systems. We're not always advised when a user leaves a subsidiary. Is there anything Okta can do to help address subsidiary users leaving and still having credentials to access our systems?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of different things here we can do. So we can do something as trivial as delegating the ability to, deprovision or suspend or terminate accounts back to that subsidiary. However, what we can also do is look at inactive accounts. So what we have, if I just go to one of my other environments, we have a little beta feature called automations. If I just go to here, let me just move this go to webinar window. And what we could do, the automations piece, let me just go through a few factors here, is we can actually automatically deactivate inactive accounts. So rather than having to manually sort of initiate that process, we can say, okay, tell me all the accounts that have been inactive for a set amount of time, and then suspend them or deactivate them. So here, I could add an automation called test 2. And I could say, every day at this time, I want to look at this particular group membership, or perhaps another condition, such as user inactivity or their password is expired. And then what you can do is you can change the lifecycle state to say suspended or deactivate it. So you could do something like, say, delegate permission back, or you could have a time inactivity window that triggers a lockout or a deactivation workflow as well. So there's different ways of doing it, but multiple options are there as well.
Perfect, thanks James. I think that actually answers one of our other questions which we've had through as well, which just says, is it possible to identify inactive users in Okta? So hopefully that answers that question as well. Just one last one as well, may have touched on in your previous question as well. It's, could you replace AD if you use something like Workspace ONE?
Yep, absolutely. So in that case with Workspace ONE, we actually have sort of a Halo integration, and we can share some more call information via Bytes after this call, is where we can be the exclusive directory system to feed Workspace ONE and actually remove any on-premise requirements. The only thing that Okta can't do at this stage is device authentication, so the authentication to the device itself. Everything else, because we can interface as LDAPs, we can do. And for device authentication, we are making ourselves, a POSIX standard, or support for the POSIX standard for our LDAP interface, so you can actually do device authentication and binding to Okta coming soon as well. But for the sort of the Workspace one, I would really advise reaching out to Toby, one of your sort of Bytes account managers, so we can share some information a little bit more in depth on that, because it really is a a good integration and talking piece.
Thanks, James. And just one last one, I think, just a clarity question more than anything, I think. We'll just say, when will the directory automations feature just demoed be released, as I don't see it in tenant?
Yeah, so the automations feature is currently in beta. So the first part of this will be coming to early access within about a month or so. And actually, if you look on the Okta roadmap, which you can get through your help and support wizard here, we're actually going to be doing much more sort of things around automations in the coming months as well. But the first part that you can actually see here on the screen should be coming to early access, which means you can request it to be enabled in your environment around the sort of early February to mid-February time window.
Great, thanks, James. So that's all the questions for now. If anyone still on the webinar did want to reach out, feel free. As James said before, you can reach out to myself, Toby Noble, or your Bytes account manager. There'll also be a feedback form sent out to you as well, and we'd appreciate any feedback you have for us. And we look forward to taking any more questions you might have for us in the future. But thank you all for attending today. I hope it was a useful time for you, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks for your time, everyone, as well.